It's time for another Dice Tower review with the Chief, Bart Brunscheen.
Hey, it's the Chief. Today we're going to talk about Hell's Gate. No, that is not an Arkham Horror expansion. It's from Victory Point Games, and it's a kind of smaller, almost introductory war game on the Korsun Pocket, which is in the Ukraine. I'd played a few strategic PC games on this. Basically, it's like January or November or January. No, it's January, February of '44, and the Russians are coming around and encircling and trying to cut off the German forces. Russians were using this. I can't remember what it's called, but they would take troops and break the front, and then they would rush in fresh reserves, sometimes whole army groups to come in. And kind of the interesting thing about this battle is that the Germans were actually able to get 2 out of every 3 of their men out of the pocket. Still a successful victory for the Russians, but it didn't quite break the front like they thought it would. Now, this game is by Philip Sabin. He also wrote a book called Simulating War, where it had the rules for this game. He teaches this in his university classes, but it was a print and play. Victory Point Games put this out. Very good production values. We'll talk about this. They use these heavy cardboard, almost like really wood counters that are then laser cut out. So you get these real cool kind of shapes that they can do. They're real chunky. They're real solid. This one doesn't have a lot of soot. Sometimes the laser cutting causes soot. There's every once in a while like a burned wood smell, but it's growing on me. The first time I got it and I had soot, I thought maybe they'd had a fire in the warehouse. They did not. They had a very intense fire on the cutting table. Also comes with 2 different map variants. We'll go in and look at that. But I want to tell you, if you're going to play this, you can do a solitaire variant. It's they even rate it like the old games where it's got a 7 out of 10 solitaire rating. It's designed for 2-player. Probably not a lot of replayability here, but it will teach you about the Korsun Pocket and what was going on. And one of the main things they show in the game is unit density, or I think it's unit density or force density. There were so many troops sometimes packed into an area, and one thing that Mr. Sabin wanted to show, or Dr. Sabin wanted to show, is that even though you have all these units, like in this game there's no stacking limit, but you can't attack with more than 2 units across a hex side. And if you're defending, the Germans can defend with 3 units. They're a little more efficient, but the Russians can only defend with 2. So you could have 20 units stacked in a hex. It's not going to help you out. So the force density is the problem, that if you get too many units stacked to an area, I can tell you from being in the military, you actually limit your force capability. You can't get troops where you want them to go. It becomes a major logistical problem. So very nice way of showing that in this game, and that is one of the core elements that Dr. Sabin wanted to teach, from my understanding. I haven't met the man personally. Let's go ahead and just take a quick look, because I can show you kind of how cool the map is and the counters, and we'll just do a brief little run through. Very portable game. You're getting, just so you get an idea, smaller rule book, typical Victory Point Games box. The map I'm currently using is actually the puzzle piece map. You can kind of see the little edges here, but you also get a paper fold out. For this one, for me, it lays a lot flatter, and it looks they look identical. Now, if I had a piece of plexiglass, I might use this one just because there wouldn't be the little puzzle piece seams, but absolutely no problem. You can see you're really not using that many units. Here's your Russian units. Here's your German units, and kind of here's your record-keeping units and a little tiny, not quite a baby die, but a little tiny die. So there's not a lot to this. This is a very portable game. If you were going to travel with this, and it has its solitaire ability here, although it is a 2-player game, very nice, tight little package. The rules, very well laid out. Here's the book for Dr. Sabin. That's the genesis of the game. but it really walks you through color rule book, things that you need are highlighted. So all very well done, some playthrough examples, and then your charts are literally back here, your sequence of play, your to hit counters, your steps that you're going to move through, and all the other little references. So everything's in a nice, tight little package. There's 8 turns in the game, and this playable, heavy playability design really gives you a history of the military action that happened inside the pocket. You're looking at a lot of things just to kind of show you what happens when, in this case, Hitler gave a German stand fast order. They weren't allowed to retreat as the generals and commanders would have liked, and it ended up causing a lot of fractures and even pockets, even big like the Corazon pocket and small ones all along the German lines. There are some weather effects. You start out in snow. There's always the opportunity that it could change into mud. Mud ends up affecting your vehicle movement. One of the key aspects of a lot of war games, and this one in particular, is supply. You really want to cut off your enemy's supply chains. Same deal as in the real world. If you cut off their supply, they'll wither and die without you ever having to fight them. The map is really nice. You get a very kind of subdued hex level, but I'm telling you, when you're in person, you can see it real well, and you can see the hex in and of itself, even without the real small lines, still gives you a feel of a hex. So having these very subtle, nice hexes, I find the map layout to be very appealing. The counters are very nice. Clearly, we're using NATO symbols. There's a step system as they take damage. You can flip over. For cutting lines of supply and whatnot, there is a zone of control. So a unit right here in the center would actually have a zone of control all the way around it, the 6 hexes that surround it. And that gives them ability through patrols or whatnot to be cutting off supply lanes. So your unit projects some of its force, which again is completely realistic in what happens in the real world. Each hex represents 20 kilometers. I'm going to reference the player turns. One of the things that makes the game very unique is that combat's actually going to happen before movement. The Russians are going to move first. Historically, the Russians the Germans were holding onto a thin pocket on the front line, and the Russians were trying to sweep around, pincer them, and cut them off. So the Russians are going to check for supply, reinforcement. There'll then be combat. Then there's going to be movement, and then there's a recovery phase. And then the German turn is going to happen, and it's going to follow right down that same phase, and then it's going to go back to housekeeping at that point. There are some special rules that are going to be predicated on the different turns that are going on along here. And you're going to want to refer to the book kind of as you work through them. If you play enough, you're going to have them down. The one criticism on the game has been it's a small area action in the Corazon pocket, and there's not a ton of replayability. It's there, but you're not going to be, this isn't ASL where you're going to be playing this for your entire life. But that's not what they're set out to do in the first place. It's a very much entry-level kind of war game or light war game that is really focusing on just a few aspects. So if you're looking for a nice, light war game that's very, very well produced and easy to get into, easy to set up, go ahead and give Hell's Gate a shot. I think you'll find it entertaining.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.